Oh, hi everyone, it's Mrs. MacPhail. Today your learning target is I can compare fractions using region models. Today our region models will be cards that are shaded to show a certain fraction. Right off the bat, today we're going to be talking about unit fractions. And a unit fraction is a fraction where the top number, or also known as the numerator, is 1. 1/8, 1/8 vertical there, this is the horizontal way to show it, and then the word form 1/8. I have a pie here that's divided into 8 slices, and Mr. Nutty decided to eat one of them, so he ate 1/8 of our pie. So 1/8 is an example of a unit fraction because the numerator is equal to 1. So today I'm going to start with using some fraction cards, and I'm going to turn them so you can see them in the picture or the fraction side up. So I'm going to switch over to this so you can see, and I'm going to lay down 1/2, or 1 out of 2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and 1/6. Now, if I put them together nice and neat, I want you to notice something. What do you notice about these fraction cards? If you said, well, Mrs. MacPhail, take a look at this. The shaded area, or the blue here, representing 1 out of 2, is pretty big. But as we go along and that denominator gets larger, we're going from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the shaded area is getting smaller with each increase of the denominator, okay? And this is because our numerators are all staying the same. So the larger your denominator is, or the bigger that denominator number, and as long as you have a unit fraction where the numerator is equal to 1, your shaded area is going to decrease. Now this is important to remember that this only works with unit fractions, because if I showed you a card like 5/6, the numerator is big compared to 2, 3, the denominator is big compared to 2, 3, 4, but look how big that shaded area is now. And that's because this is not a unit fraction, because the numerator is greater than 1. Next up, we're going to use our half card to help us find cards that are less than half shaded. I still have my half card hanging out down in the bottom left here, and I also have 2/6. I've gone ahead and looked in all of my fractions and pulled out the cards that I found that are less than half shaded, or at least a couple of them for you to see. I have 2/6 and I have 2/12, and we're going to use this half card once again to help us compare those fraction shaded areas. So what do you notice this time about our numerators compared to our denominators in these three cards? Well, if you said, Mrs. MacPhail, I noticed that first, these two cards have areas that are not as much shaded compared to 1/2. It's less shaded. And I'd say, yes, you're right. You might have also said, Mrs. MacPhail, I also noticed something about the numerators and the denominators. I noticed that my numerators are less than half the value of my denominator. So 2 is less than half of the value of 12, and 2 is less than half of the value of 6. Well, what would be half of the value of 6? If I were to take my denominator, which is 6 for this case, and divide it by 2, I would find that 6 divided by 2 is 3. So in order for my card to be equal to half, I would have to have had a numerator at least equal to or greater than 3. In this case, I only have 2 out of 6 parts shaded, so my shaded area is going to be less than half. That would also be true with 1/6 and 0/6, because 0, 1, and 2 are less than half of the value of our denominator. Next up, we're going to use our half card to help us find cards that are more than half shaded. So I still have my half cards sitting out on the side here. I've also selected 2 out of 2, or equal to 1, 4/6, and 10/12. What do you notice this time about the numerators and the denominators? Well, if you said, Mrs. MacPhail, well, the numerators on each card are more than half of the denominators. You're right. You would have been correct if you said that. Let's look at 4/6 for an example. If I wanted to know half the number of my denominator, I would divide my denominator by 2, which I know is equal to 3. So if I'm looking for a card that is more than half shaded, I know that I would have needed a numerator, in this case, that would have been more than 3. In this case, I have 4/6, so it makes sense to me that I have a greater fraction shaded on my card. And finally, we're now going to use our half card to help us find cards that are exactly half shaded. So I still have my half card on the side down here. I've also found my card 2/4 and 4/8. What do you notice about the numerators compared to the denominators this time? If you said, well, Mrs. McPhail, this time the numerators are exactly half of the denominators, you would have been correct. So if I am looking for a fraction card that is exactly half shaded, or a fraction that is equal to half, I know that my numerator has to be exactly half of my denominator. So to find that, I could take my denominator, the 4 in this case, divide it by 2 since I'm looking for half, and if I wanted to find a fraction card that is exactly half shaded, where my numerator is exactly half of my denominator, I would divide it by 2 and put it on the top. So in this case, 2/4 is equal to 1/2. Alrighty folks, that's all the time we have for today. Your learning target was to be able to compare fractions using region models. See you later, alligators.